All right, welcome back. Today, new movement on several fronts of the Jeffrey Epstein story. Earlier this morning, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee released new photographs and videos of Jeffrey Epstein's opulent private island, provided to the committee by the Attorney General for the U.S. Virgin Islands, where Epstein's property was located. The island, of course, was the place where, according to his accusers, Epstein brought girls as young as 11. The disclosure coming 2 weeks after President Trump signed legislation to force the release of the Epstein files. Today, a bipartisan group of lawmakers requested the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, brief them on the status of the Department of Justice's efforts to release those files. The Justice Department has a total of 30 days to do so. Joining me now in the arena to discuss, Democratic Congressman from Illinois, Raja Krishnamoorthi. He sits on the House Oversight Committee, which has released these documents. Congressman, thank you so much for being here. I want to start with these pictures that the committee has released. One photo shows a blackboard and some of the words on it: power, deception, plots, political. What do you know about what's on that blackboard and what else we have learned from these images you've obtained?
We're still trying to get our arms around these photos, trying to understand and make sense of what's going on. But suffice it to say that those words that you had mentioned evoke kind of the darkest kind of suspicions about what happened on that island and in Jeffrey Epstein's home. Look, Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, in my book, are monsters. They perpetrated this child sex trafficking ring against more than 1,000 victims. And those girls have now become middle-aged women, and they still have not had justice for the crimes that were perpetrated against them. So that's in part why I think people are resolved to get to the bottom of what happened. That's why we're going after these files. That's why we're sharing these files with the public as well as these images. And we're going to continue to until we do justice for these survivors and find out how we prevent this from ever happening again.
Let me ask you about some of the redactions that our viewers will see. There's a photo of the phone, of Epstein's phone, apparently, and then you can see on this blackboard right now there are some redactions. Did Democrats decide what to redact here? How were those decisions made, and what is being concealed?
Well, what I understand is what I understand that we tried to basically conceal or redact any information that would lead to someone's personal identifiable information or that somehow would expose victims or survivors who've already been traumatized. That's generally the rule that has governed the redactions on our side.
And are you comfortable with the way these redactions were made? Because it will likely generate questions.
I'm comfortable. Obviously, as we kind of continue with the investigation, lawmakers on both sides will be able to view the materials in an unredacted form if they have further questions, and they should be able to ask further questions on top of the ones that might emerge right now. But I think that at the bottom of at the end of this particular day, I think that we have to make sure that we share as much information as we possibly can with the public, because they have a right to know. They need to know exactly what's in the files and what are in these images.
Can you tell us any more about additional material you may have? Is there more material that Democrats on the committee have received that the public has not yet seen? And can you characterize that for us as a general matter?
I think the biggest kind of trove of documents that we're going through right now are the financial records that have been disclosed by these institutions. There were more than $1 billion in transactions in this particular sex trafficking scheme. And we need to follow the money. We need to be able to know who paid whom for what. And so that set of documents needs to be gone through right now and then released to the public as well. But I think that is potentially the most fruitful area of further investigation at this point.
Do you think that those financial documents might implicate some banner names who worked at those banks, for example?
Possibly. I think that we should, basically look at not only, who in the scheme may have been initiating and receiving the money, but why is it that these financial institutions allowed for these transactions to happen in the first place? You and I have to jump through all kinds of hoops through their know your customer obligations to even open a checking account. And yet these transactions happened willy-nilly without anybody knowing the purpose of the transactions or the destination or who initiated them. It just stretches the bounds of credulity, in my opinion.
How would you characterize, how are you feeling about how your Republican counterparts on the committee are interacting with this information? Do you feel like they are also committed to transparency?
I think so, for the most part. I think that a lot of them, at least in private, express the same concerns that I do. And, when we met with these survivors, I think that really did make a change in terms of people's attitude and approach to this whole situation. There were real people that had been affected, real lives that had been forever traumatized. And I feel that infuses the work that we're doing right now on a bipartisan basis.
And finally, sir, Ghislaine Maxwell, of course, the longtime associate of Jeffrey Epstein, now serving time in prison, is petitioning for her release. What is your response to that?
No way, no how. I actually have a resolution that would basically call for the president not to give any form of clemency, any leniency to Ghislaine Maxwell. She is a monster as far as I'm concerned. What she did in hurting so many people forever. And she should not be given any leniency in her sentence. And I'm continuing to ask people to join my resolution against any kind of pardon or clemency or any leniency.
All right, Congressman Raja Krishnamoorthi, thank you very much for your time today, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.